After years of hitting rock bottom, I finally turned my life around. I woke up on the bathroom floor, wondering if anyone would even notice if I disappeared. The taste of stale beer and regret burned at the back of my throat, mixing with the bitter tang of vomit I hadn't quite managed to spit out before collapsing. My head was pounding like a drumline in a marching band, each beat syncing with the cold, unforgiving tiles pressing against my cheek. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing like it was mocking me. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to cooperate. My apartment, a small, one-bedroom dump I couldn't afford, felt more like a prison cell than a home. Empty cans and crumpled bills littered the floor, a testament to weeks of neglect, bad choices, and self-destruction. It's funny, in a terrible way, how you can go through life making 100 little mistakes and never really notice them until they pile up on your chest like bricks. I was 28, living alone and completely off the rails. No friends who cared enough to call, no family who knew where I was, or if they did, they had long given up on me. Debt was swallowing me alive, my job had disappeared along with my motivation, and I was drowning in a cocktail of cheap whiskey and self-pity. Looking back, I can trace the downward spiral to 100 different moments. But it all really started when I thought I was smarter than I was. When I thought the world owed me a break I didn't deserve. I used to think I had control. I used to think I could balance partying and work, fun and responsibility. But those nights of drinking, just to take the edge off, turned into weeks, then months, then years. I'd call in sick to jobs I hated, lie about my excuses, and promise myself I'd turn it around tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. By the time I hit 28, I realized that I had nothing. No savings, no career, no love, no respect from anyone, including myself. Just a deep, gnawing emptiness and the faint hope that maybe one day someone would throw me a lifeline. The night that brought me here, lying on a cold bathroom floor, wondering if the universe would even notice if I quit existing, started like any other. I had picked up a six-pack from the corner store, convincing myself I'd just have a few drinks and relax. Relaxing, for me, had always meant forgetting everything that mattered. The loneliness, the bills, the guilt, the shame, all of it disappeared under the haze of alcohol. But this night was different. Or maybe I was just different. Because after the first couple of beers, I found myself reaching for the bottle that would usually tip me over the edge, the one I'd promised myself I'd stop drinking months ago. I didn't stop. And that was the night I realized how far gone I had become. The bathroom mirror, smudged and cracked, reflected a man I barely recognized. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess, his skin pale and greasy. That man used to have ambition, drive, and a sense of humor that could light up a room. Now, all I saw was exhaustion, regret, and the physical imprint of years of self-destruction. I wondered how I had let it come to this. I thought about my family, my mom, my dad. They probably thought I had disappeared into nothing by now, and honestly, that thought didn't hurt as much as it should have. Estranged, distant, angry, our relationships were a casualty of my decisions, of my inability to handle life like an adult. My dad had always been critical, my mom always worried, and both had given up trying to save me after one too many broken promises and ruined nights. Maybe it was easier that way. Maybe I deserved their distance. I remember sitting on that bathroom floor, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in years, letting myself feel the weight of it all. The missed opportunities, the burned bridges, the nights I couldn't remember, and the mornings I woke up wishing I hadn't survived. I thought about the tiny moments that had led me here. Dropping out of college because I thought I didn't need a degree. Hanging out with people who celebrated recklessness instead of responsibility. Choosing cheap thrills over long-term gain. The dominoes fell one by one. Each one a small decision I barely thought about. Until suddenly, there I was. 28, jobless, drunk, alone, and living in a place I couldn't afford. And yes, my apartment situation was a disaster. I was late on rent for the third month in a row, and I knew the landlord was done being patient. He had left a nasty note on the door a week ago. Something along the lines of, "Pay or pack your bags," scrawled in red ink. I laughed when I read it. That was me, laughing at consequences instead of facing them. I wasn't sure if the laugh was because I thought it was funny or because I'd stopped caring altogether. Either way, it didn't matter. I had no plan, no money, and no one to help me. I felt trapped, but the alcohol made it bearable, at least temporarily. The flashbacks came in waves that night, uninvited but unavoidable. I remembered the first time I got drunk in high school, thinking it made me cool. I remembered that first job I lost because I couldn't handle responsibility, and the first girl I lost because I wasn't ready for love. And then, the heavier memories, the arguments with my parents, the friends who stopped returning my calls, the nights I wandered aimlessly, too ashamed to go home, too numb to go anywhere else. Each memory felt like a punch to the gut, but I didn't stop drinking. The alcohol dulled the pain, but it also sharpened the clarity of what I had done to myself. I was spiraling and I knew it, but knowing didn't change anything. I didn't care, at least not until I ended up here. That night, I blacked out somewhere between the third and fourth bottle. I don't remember the exact moment, only fragments. The sound of breaking glass, the taste of blood in my mouth, the searing pain in my head hitting the tile. When I woke up, I was alone, not just in my apartment, but in the world. I realized then that I could die right here, right now, and no one would care. Not a friend, not a family member, not even the people I occasionally pretended to talk to online. I could vanish, and the world would go on without me. That thought, terrifying as it was, made something click inside me. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe I still had a chance to change, even if I didn't know how. But first, I had to get up. I forced myself onto my knees, then onto my feet. My legs wobbled like I was learning to walk again. Every movement hurt. My head throbbed, my stomach churned, my hands shook. I looked around my apartment. Stacks of unopened mail, empty bottles, clothes strewn across the floor, and felt the weight of my failures crush me for a moment. Then I made a decision. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just the realization that I couldn't keep living like this. Whatever it was enough to get me moving. I started small. I cleaned up the bathroom first, tossing broken bottles and wiping up spilled beer. Then I tackled the rest of the apartment, moving like a soldier with no plan, only instinct. By the time I was done, it wasn't perfect, but it was livable. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of pride. It was pathetic in the grand scheme of things. A clean apartment doesn't fix a shattered life, but it was a start. And I needed a start. I called into my job. I didn't have one anymore, but I pretended I did. I left a voicemail that was mostly incoherent, a mix of apologies and promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Then I sat down on my bed, staring at the ceiling again, and thought about what had brought me here. I thought about the choices, the people, the nights of drinking, the nights of loneliness, the constant gnawing feeling that I was failing at life. I thought about my parents, my friends, my lost opportunities, and the life I had wasted. And I cried, not quietly, not politely, but like someone who had been holding in years of shame and self-loathing. I cried until I had no tears left, until my eyes burned and my throat ached. I cried because I realized I was alive and that maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to make things right. I didn't know how I was going to do it. I didn't know if I could do it. But lying on that bathroom floor, waking up with the taste of my own failure in my mouth, I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to die like this. I wasn't going to let the decisions I had made define me forever. I wasn't going to let myself become a cautionary tale. I was going to claw my way out of the mess I had created, no matter how long it took. No matter how hard it was, no matter how many times I fell. And that, strange as it sounds, was the first real moment of clarity I had had in years. The night I nearly killed myself with my own recklessness wasn't just the lowest point, it was the starting line. And though I had no idea what the race ahead would look like, I knew I had to run it. Somehow, because if I didn't, no one else would. I thought I could do it alone. But that night, I realized I couldn't even do tomorrow alone. The day after I woke up on the bathroom floor, my apartment a little cleaner and my head still pounding, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. I didn't recognize them anymore. Not the hands that had smashed bottles, punched walls, scrolled endlessly through social media while avoiding responsibility, and held a whiskey glass like it was a lifeline. My life had become a checklist of failures, and I was finally forced to confront them one by one. I started with the phone. That little rectangle of plastic and glass had been my enemy for years, full of unanswered messages, deleted contacts, and reminders of people I'd hurt. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, terrified of what would happen if I actually pressed call. But I knew something had to change. The first person I called was Mark, my best friend from high school. Or at least he used to be my best friend. We drifted apart after college, mostly because of me. I had chosen partying over responsibility, jobs over our friendship, lies over honesty. When I dialed his number, I thought about what I would even say. Hey, remember me? I'm a mess. Want to catch up? It sounded pathetic, but I pressed call anyway. Mark answered on the first ring. I almost hung up. His voice, calm but guarded, made my stomach twist. Ryan, he said. Hey, it's me? I stammered, hating the sound of my own voice. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. There was silence. I could almost hear the gears turning on the other side. The skepticism, the disbelief. You're alive, he said finally. I wasn't sure you would be. That cut deeper than anything else, but it was also a lifeline. We talked for a while, awkwardly at first, then more naturally. No promises, no plans, just a tentative connection. The first step was admitting I had burned bridges. The second was trying to rebuild them, even if slowly. From there, I started thinking about my past relationships. I had left a string of broken hearts behind me. Girls I had loved and lost, sometimes because I wasn't ready. Sometimes because I was too selfish to realize love needed care and attention. I reached out to a few of them. Some blocked me immediately. Some didn't respond. And some actually listened. That in itself felt miraculous. Then there was my family. Calling them was harder than anything else. I could almost hear my mom's disappointment, my dad's frustration, but I swallowed my pride. I explained where I had been, what I had done, and that I was trying to make changes. The conversations were tense, filled with awkward pauses and unsaid words, but they were honest. And for the first time in years, I felt a fraction of the weight lift. It wasn't just about reconnecting with people. It was about reconnecting with myself. I realized I had been running from my mistakes for too long. I had been chasing distractions, alcohol, parties, meaningless work, temporary thrills, because facing the truth was too painful. But now, for the first time, I was willing to face it. That willingness brought me to someone unexpected. Mrs. Lane, my old high school English teacher, had always been a figure of stability in my chaotic teenage years. I had barely spoken to her since graduation, but in a moment of desperation, I reached out. To my surprise, she answered immediately. Her voice was warm, understanding, and free of judgment. "Ryan, I've been wondering where you were," she said. "I'm glad you called." We met at a small cafe near my apartment. She didn't lecture me, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just listened. And when I spilled everything, my failures, my drinking, my loneliness, she nodded. Not with pity, but with recognition. "You're not done yet," she said. "You have potential, Ryan. You just need a guide to help you see it." That's how I found myself signing up for therapy and a rehab program the very next week. I hated it at first. Sitting in a circle of strangers, talking about my feelings and admitting my weaknesses felt alien. I was used to being the guy who could handle everything alone. But the truth was, I couldn't handle even a day alone, let alone the rest of my life. Therapy was brutal. My first session was a disaster. I fumbled over words, avoided topics, made jokes to hide my shame. The therapist, Dr. Mitchell, was patient but persistent. She asked questions that cut straight to the core of my pain. "Why do you drink?" she asked. "What are you running from?" I wanted to scream, "Everything," but I only whispered, "I don't know." It was in those sessions that I realized just how deep my denial ran. I had convinced myself that I was fine, that my habits were normal, that I could bounce back anytime. But I couldn't. I had been numbing myself for years, and now I had to feel everything I had buried. Anxiety, regret, shame, anger, emotions I hadn't allowed myself to experience for over a decade hit me all at once. Rehab was no easier. The first week, I relapsed just one night. I thought I could handle a drink socially. I couldn't. I woke up on the floor again, heart racing, shame consuming me. But this time, it was different. I didn't laugh it off, didn't pretend it didn't happen. I wrote it down, shared it in group therapy, and faced the consequences. I realized recovery wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. Self-discipline was another mountain entirely. I had spent years letting my impulses rule me, letting laziness and short-term gratification dictate my life. Now, I had to build routines, set boundaries, and hold myself accountable. Simple tasks like making my bed, cooking a meal, going for a run became victories. And each small victory reminded me that change was possible, even if it was slow and painful. Some days were unbearable. I wanted to quit. I wanted to go back to old habits, to forget everything. But Mrs. Lane, Mark, and a few people who had forgiven me reminded me that I wasn't alone. I started journaling my setbacks, my victories, and the small sparks of hope I felt. Writing became a mirror, reflecting both my failures and my potential. I also realized that facing the mess wasn't just about myself. It was about the people I had hurt, the relationships I had neglected, the bridges I had burned. Apologies weren't enough, but they were a start. I had to show through actions that I was serious about change. I started volunteering at a community center. Just small things like helping with after-school programs or cleaning up local parks. It wasn't glamorous, but it grounded me. It reminded me that the world didn't revolve around my pain, that helping others could be a form of self-healing. By the end of that first month, I could feel a shift. I was still broken, but I was moving forward. My apartment was cleaner, my relationships were tentatively repairing, my drinking had slowed dramatically, and I had started to see glimpses of the person I could be. I realized that facing the mess wasn't a one-time event. It was a continuous process, a daily confrontation with my past, my choices, and my weaknesses. The turning point came one evening after a particularly grueling therapy session. I had spent 2 hours unpacking the patterns that led me here. Why I sabotaged relationships, why I chose alcohol over ambition, why I avoided responsibility. I left the office feeling exhausted and small, but also alive. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on a path. Walking home, I passed a small bookstore that I used to love as a teenager. I hadn't been inside in years. Something compelled me to go in. I wandered the aisles, running my fingers over the spines, and picked up a worn copy of The Alchemist. I read a few pages, then sat on the floor, completely absorbed. The words hit me like a revelation. Change is possible, but only if you take the first step, only if you believe. That night, I went home and wrote in my journal. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know I can't do it alone. And that's okay. I don't have to do it alone. It wasn't a perfect night. I still had cravings. I still doubted myself, but I also had hope. And for the first time in years, hope felt real. Not a fleeting fantasy, not a drunken hallucination, not a temporary high. I mean real, solid hope. Facing the mess wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't fast, but it was necessary. And slowly, painfully, day by day, I began to see that maybe, just maybe, I could pull myself out of the hole I had dug for decades. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know if I would ever fully forgive myself or if the people I had hurt would ever forgive me. But I knew I had taken the first step towards something better. And that, in a life that had felt hopeless for so long, felt like a victory worth holding on to. I realized turning my life around isn't about one huge victory. It's about showing up every single day. That's what I kept telling myself as I walked out of my tiny apartment every morning, heading to a job that was far from glamorous, far from my dreams, but at least it was a start. The first step in rebuilding isn't some heroic act, it's mundane, often humiliating and painfully slow. And yet, for the first time in years, it felt like I was moving in the right direction. After weeks of therapy, rehab, and reconnecting with people I had hurt, I knew I had to do more than just stop failing. I had to actively create a life I could be proud of, or at least one I could live with. My first attempt at rebuilding started with work. I found a small position at a local cafe, washing dishes and occasionally helping with orders. I didn't care about the pay. Minimum wage was enough for rent, a few groceries, and a little extra to stay sober. What mattered was showing up. At first, every task felt like climbing Everest. I burned a batch of coffee, spilled soup, dropped plates. My coworkers, mostly younger students and part-timers, looked at me with a mixture of pity and skepticism. I could feel it in the way they whispered, the way the manager's eyebrows raised when I fumbled with the espresso machine. But I didn't quit. I kept showing up. I scrubbed pots until my hands were raw. I memorized the menu. I even started volunteering for extra shifts when I could. And slowly, the skepticism faded. My first paycheck wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that I could stick to something, even something small. That consistency was more important than talent, more important than perfection. That lesson would stick with me longer than any speech from therapy. Alongside work, I started reconnecting with my family in small ways. Phone calls to my parents became weekly, tentative but genuine. I visited my mom one Saturday, helping her in the garden. A tiny gesture, but one that meant more than words could express. My dad and I took our first real conversation in years without yelling or passive aggression. It was awkward and clumsy, full of pauses and unfinished sentences, but it was progress. Every interaction reminded me that rebuilding relationships wasn't about erasing the past. It was about showing you were trying, day after day. I also rediscovered an old passion that had been buried under years of distraction and self-destruction: writing. In high school, I had dreamed of being a journalist or novelist, but life, my choices, my laziness, my drinking, had buried that dream under a mountain of excuses. I dusted off my laptop and started journaling, then moved on to short stories. At first, the words were clumsy, forced, but I persisted. Writing became my therapy, my outlet, my way to process the chaos of my past while imagining a better future. I even submitted a piece to a local magazine, and when they accepted it, I nearly cried. That tiny recognition reminded me that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I could create, contribute, and maybe even inspire. Of course, rebuilding wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, and nights when I questioned whether I was truly capable of change. Friends from my past, the ones who had distanced themselves, were cautious around me. Some didn't believe in me, in my sobriety. Some didn't believe I had the self-discipline to hold a job, and a few outright mocked my attempts at change. I can't lie, it hurt, but I learned to focus on what I could control: my actions, my consistency, my willingness to face each day. And then there was love, or at least the possibility of it. I never thought I'd put myself out there again, not after the string of failed relationships and heartbreaks I had left behind. But life has a funny way of forcing you to confront your fears. I met her at the cafe, a regular customer named Emily, an artist who had a quiet, observant way of noticing everything. She asked questions, smiled at my clumsy coffee making, and never judged my awkwardness. Slowly, our conversations grew longer, deeper. She challenged me in ways I didn't expect. She questioned my excuses, encouraged my writing, and, most terrifyingly, made me hope. Hope is dangerous, especially when you've spent years believing you didn't deserve it. I faltered, retreated, tested boundaries, afraid I'd ruin whatever connection was forming. But Emily didn't push, she waited, patiently. And in those moments, I realized that rebuilding my life wasn't just about me. It was about being able to give to others as well. Love, friendship, trust, they required vulnerability, consistency, and courage. All things I was learning to cultivate. Fitness became another cornerstone of my rebuilding. I started small: morning runs around the block, bodyweight exercises in my apartment, walks in the park. Every drop of sweat was a reminder that I was still here, still fighting, still capable of growth. My body, long neglected and weakened by years of substance abuse and inactivity, started to respond. I felt stronger, more alive, and more confident. And that physical progress mirrored the mental and emotional progress I was making. Moments of success were subtle, often overlooked, but they accumulated like bricks in a foundation. The first week I went a full week without drinking. I celebrated quietly. The first short story I completed without abandoning it halfway, I printed it out and read it aloud to myself. Rebuilding friendships, I reconnected with Mark, my high school friend, over a hiking trip. Simple activities, simple victories, but they mattered more than anything because they reminded me that I was capable of more than failure. Even setbacks, which were inevitable, became lessons. I had nights when doubt crept in, when old habits whispered seductively, promising numbness over effort. I stumbled, I argued, I questioned myself, but every time, I reminded myself consistency is more important than perfection. Showing up every day, no matter how small the effort, is what rebuilds a life. By the end of the year, my life looked very different and saw from the mess I had been living in. I had a steady job at the cafe, writing was becoming more than a hobby, My relationships with family and friends were slowly repairing, and I had even started dating Emily officially. Nothing was perfect, far from it, but the pattern of self-destruction had been broken. I was learning to live intentionally, to embrace discomfort, to value growth over instant gratification. One evening, after a long day of work and a quiet writing session at home, I sat on my apartment balcony, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. I thought about how far I had come, from the bathroom floor, drunk and broken, to this moment of quiet reflection. It wasn't a huge victory, not a triumphant declaration to the world, but it was mine, and that was enough. Rebuilding a life isn't about monumental gestures. It's about showing up when it's hard, choosing effort over avoidance, taking responsibility for your actions, and believing, slowly, painfully, consistently, that change is possible. I had learned that the hard way. Every phone call, every therapy session, every spilled coffee, every mile run, every word written, every laugh shared with Emily, they were all proof that I was capable of living again. And while the road ahead was long and uncertain, for the first time in years, I believed I could walk it. One day at a time, one small victory at a time, one choice to keep going even when it felt impossible. I used to think I was a failure, but I realized failure isn't what breaks you. It's refusing to try again. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far I've come. A year ago, I was lying on my bathroom floor, convinced that no one would care if I disappeared. Now, I wake up in a small sunlit apartment I can afford, with a job I respect, a girlfriend who challenges me, friends who believe in me, and a sense of self-worth I never thought I'd reclaim. I've learned that redemption isn't a moment, it's a process, and it's messy, uneven, and beautiful in its own quiet way. After months of showing up, keeping promises, and facing the consequences of my past, life started to feel like something I could actively shape instead of something that happened to me. The cafe job turned into a management position after I proved I could handle responsibility. I trained new employees, solved conflicts, and even started implementing small creative changes to improve the workflow. I earned respect not because I demanded it, but because people could see I had changed. Writing remained my anchor. My short stories were getting published more consistently, and I even started working on a full-length manuscript. Every word I typed, every story I shared reminded me that I was capable of creating value, of leaving something behind, and of being seen for more than my failures. Emily supported me through every late night at the laptop, every moment of self-doubt, every nervous conversation about my past. Her belief in me, even when I doubted myself, became one of the most powerful forces in my life. Health and fitness became part of my identity too. The runs around the neighborhood that used to feel like torture now became meditation. I wasn't just strengthening my body, I was proving to myself day after day that I could endure, persevere, and improve. Small victories accumulated into confidence. I no longer felt like the person who ran from life. I felt like the person who could face it head on. But redemption isn't just about self-improvement. It's about making peace with the past. I reached out to people I had hurt, not to beg forgiveness, but to offer closure. One night, I met my ex-girlfriend, Sarah, at a quiet diner. We talked honestly for hours. I admitted my failures, my mistakes, and the pain I had caused her. She listened and shared her own wounds. We didn't get back together. That wasn't the point. The point was acknowledging the past without letting it control the future. I hugged her goodbye, and for the first time, I felt the weight of guilt lift. I did the same with my family. My parents had been cautious, wary of my progress, but they began to see consistency in my actions. My father even joined me for a weekend hike, and I could see the pride he had been holding back for years. My mother smiled more freely around me, and we laughed over small mundane things like we used to before life became complicated. These moments weren't monumental, but they were real, and they were enough to remind me that relationships could be repaired. Slowly but surely. One of the most meaningful parts of my redemption came unexpectedly. At the cafe, I noticed a young man who reminded me of myself at 28. Messy, withdrawn, exhausted, clearly on the edge of giving up. His name was Liam, and he reminded me of the nights I had spent drowning in self-pity. I started talking to him, subtly at first, offering small guidance, sharing lessons I had learned. Over time, he opened up about his struggles with alcohol, job loss, and estrangement from family. Mentoring Liam wasn't easy. It forced me to stay accountable, to remember the pain of my own past, and to confront the dark memories I had buried. But it was also profoundly rewarding. Watching him make small victories, the first sober week, a successful job interview, a smile that wasn't forced, felt like I was giving back a second chance I had been given. Helping him reminded me that redemption isn't only personal, it's shared. And that realization, more than any paycheck or publication, became the most meaningful part of my life. Of course, challenges still came. Old fears, lingering doubts, and occasional cravings reminded me that growth isn't permanent, it's ongoing. Some days I would lie awake at night thinking about how easy it would be to slide back into old habits. But every morning I made a choice. To run, to write, to show up, to love, to mentor. Every day became an act of redemption, a proof of resilience, and a commitment to the life I wanted to live. Emily and I grew closer, navigating the complexities of love after trauma. She didn't try to fix me. Instead, she walked beside me, challenged me when I made excuses, and celebrated my victories with genuine joy. Our relationship wasn't perfect and it wasn't without conflict, but it was real. And for the first time, I felt I could be fully seen and fully accepted, scars and all. The culmination of all this change hit me one quiet evening. I had just finished reading the first chapter of my manuscript to a small group of friends and fellow writers. They applauded, gave feedback, and discussed ideas, and I realized that I had created something lasting from the chaos of my past. Later, I walked home alone, the city lights reflecting off the wet streets from a recent rain. I paused on a bridge, looking out at the water, and reflected on the journey. The bathroom floor, the therapy sessions, the relapses, the small victories, the restored friendships, the newfound love, the mentoring of Liam. It all added up. Every misstep, every moment of pain, every sleepless night had brought me to this point. I had earned my second chance not because life had granted it, but because I had fought for it, day after day, with imperfect persistence and relentless honesty. I realized then that redemption doesn't arrive fully formed. It doesn't come as a sudden epiphany or a single triumph. It comes in increments, through showing up when it's hard, making small choices that align with who you want to be, repairing what you can, helping those who are struggling, and refusing to give up even when the world seems indifferent. I took out my journal and wrote, "I am not the man I was. I am stronger. I am wiser. I am capable of love, trust, and growth, and for the first time, I believe I deserve this life." Standing on that bridge, the wind biting my cheeks, I allowed myself to feel it fully. The peace, the pride, the gratitude. I had come from nothing, and now I had something worth holding on to. A life rebuilt, a past reconciled, and a future I could face with confidence. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I would keep showing up. Not because I had to, not because anyone demanded it, but because I finally understood that life is a gift and redemption is a choice. Every day I lived it, I would honor that choice. I used to think I was a failure, but now I knew better. Failure isn't the end. It's refusing to try again that breaks you. And I had tried. I had fallen, I had stumbled, I had hurt and been hurt, but I had tried, and that was everything. As I walked back into my apartment that night, Liam's progress, Emily's smile, my parents' cautious pride, and my own quiet victories swirled together in my mind. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, fully, intentionally, and with the knowledge that second chances are real, if you're willing to fight for them. Alright, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.